We were lucky enough to snag a pre-order for a PlayStation 5, so just like with the Xbox Series X, we've been putting this thing through some tests. 10 of them, in fact. We've got some technical stuff you might want to know, as well as some weirder tests. So let's get started off with a crazy one and just talk about the spill test first. We did some mess tests with the DualSense controller, and it ended up pretty close to what you'd expect, but hey, we did it so you don't have to learn the hard way. First, we greased up our hands a bit and got them dirty to see how it takes to the white controller, and it's not so bad. It mostly wipes off. Grease and nasty stuff from your fingers, maybe if you're eating food and stuff and being a gross boy, all that wipes off the controllers pretty easily. But one thing we did discover is that crumbs and stuff can get stuck in the crevices alongside the left and the right side of the touchpad. This stuff is nothing new, of course. No controller is perfect, and no controller is safe from gunk getting stuck near the joysticks, so yeah. Now you know, we did this, so now you have to watch it. The spill test, however, was pretty interesting. We dumped Mountain Dew all over it, and the controller survived, totally. Now, you know, we're not professionals or anything, but this thing took a spill like no problem, and it kept operating totally normally. It did leak soda for the rest of the time we were using it, though, from the cracks, so be careful, obviously, okay? Now over at number 9, on the technical side, let's talk about the newest software update. Now, we got an update on November 17th, less than a week after launch, that supposedly, and I quote, improves performance. And that's it. That's what the patch notes say. We don't have any additional information on what this update does. We tried to compare the performance on both versions of the system, but nothing really came of it. We didn't find any difference at all. Most likely, this is just the first of many updates and patches to fix some of the frequent issues players are finding. You've probably heard about some of them on social media. For example, Miles Morales bricking consoles while on rest mode, Demon Souls not booting until you restart the console. This did happen to one of us. External drives are also causing problems, and there's a weird download queue error where it doesn't let you download until you restart your system. Ironically, the download error happened to us like 4 times when trying to download the patch. It showed an error saying that the DNS couldn't be reached and had to restart the console to make it work, but thankfully it saved the download progress after every failed attempt. Most of these errors aren't fixed yet, so this update might just be for little bugs found before the launch. We just wish that Sony were a bit more upfront with what the actual fixes were, instead of them just writing, and I quote, improved performance. But everybody always asks questions like, are the PS5s having widespread problems? And we got the newest software update, so we wanted to at least give you some info. Now, moving on to number 8, we also attempted a quick, rough version of a drop test. And the DualSense was surprisingly resilient, man. First, we tested it from a 3-foot drop, you know, a bit higher than your average sitting position, and we did that 3 times. The controller worked like totally normal. Then we dropped it from about 5 feet 3 times, and the controller continued to soldier on like totally normal. Then we did 8 feet, dropping the bad boy another 3 times, and lo and behold, he was totally fine. Everything worked like normal. Now, you know, you'd think that with the fancy features in this controller, like the haptic feedback vibration and special triggers, things would break easily, but it turned out fine every single time we dropped it, which is good to know. Of course, these aren't perfect tests, but at least you have an example, because we know you probably didn't want to test it out yourself. Now, over at number 7, a lot of people have been asking us, how do the adaptive triggers actually work and feel? Now, we've covered these things in the Before You Buy video, but they're so great, and a lot of people wanted a bit more info, so we're going to explain it here. They're really cool. So for Astro's Playroom and Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War, there are like our 2 favorite examples. Astro's Playroom was developed by Sony specifically to showcase the DualSense, and we definitely recommend playing it, because not only is it a very fun platformer with a lot of great PlayStation Easter eggs, it does a great job of showing you what the DualSense is capable of. But with Call of Duty, we specifically love how the shooting feels and how we can demonstrate it. The trigger actually bounces around in a way that simulates recoil when firing a weapon. It feels different depending on the weapon, so the LMG vibrates and trigger locks a bit more intense than something like an SMG. And the same can be said about aiming down the sights too. It's a bit more subtle, but there's way more resistance when aiming the LMG because of how much heavier it is compared to aiming a pistol with the trigger. The DualSense controller is really cool, and we're excited to see how other games implement this stuff. They do generate a bit more noise than you'd expect, and probably aren't the best for something like a competitive game, but if you just want to get immersed, they seem to really, really do the job. Now, next at number 6, we messed around with the DualShock 4 and the DualSense with different games to see how they work. First, you cannot use a DualShock 4 to play PS5 games, which I guess isn't much of a surprise, honestly, but you can obviously use it for PlayStation 4 games running on a PlayStation 5. On the flip side, though, you can use the DualSense to play PS4 games on the PlayStation 5. Depending on the game, this can be a little jarring. You know, for something like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, a game that we very much know our way around, the DualSense felt a little weird just because it's a different hand feel. It takes a minute to get used to it, but while we're talking about compatibility, let's also talk about the battery life. In our rough tests, we got well over 7 hours running the controller and various games constantly, but didn't track it super well. So to reference, it is worth pointing out that VG247 and Push Square tested by playing Astro's Playroom, you know, the game that constantly pushes the controller to its limits, which probably won't be super normal, but for that, VG247 had 4 to 6 hours and Push Square had 5 to 6 hours. Also, expect the controllers to charge super quick thanks to USB-C, well under the 3-hour power supplied to the PS5 in the rest mode setting. Now next, over at number 5, another great feature on the PlayStation 5 that doesn't exist on Xbox Series X is Wi-Fi 6 support. This may not be a big deal right now, but in a few more years, it may make the difference in download speeds and game streaming, so we wanted to point it out because not enough people talk about it. Now we did do a very, very rough Wi-Fi range test. We plugged the PlayStation 5 in the dining room and walked away in a straight line with no obstacles in the middle with our phone in our hand as a hotspot, and then we started to have connection issues at around 50 feet of distance. It doesn't really mean too much, but at least you can get a rough sense of how the console operates in this situation. Now next, over at number 4, just like the PlayStation 4, not enough people have talked about this, but the PlayStation 5 has remote play and it works with your old PS4, PCs, and phones. Just make sure to plug your console with an Ethernet cable because even with 5 GHz Wi-Fi, we had a hit or miss connection. This is still a cool feature because it gives a second life to your PlayStation 4. Now you don't have to choose between selling it or putting it back in the box and putting it away somewhere in storage. You can just plug it into a TV in another room and then just stream the games there. And it works okay if you have both consoles plugged directly through Ethernet cable. Wi-Fi, even if it's 5 GHz, it's so bad and the connection breaks constantly. And when it comes to phones to stream wherever you are, it's also not so great because there's no Ethernet option. The connection breaks pretty consistently and just isn't really up to par with other services like xCloud or on PC, NVIDIA's GeForce Now. And that's with us testing it with over 100 megabits per second fiber optic internet. And also, just to add a little salt to the injury, it turns out that you can play PlayStation 5 games with a PS4 controller, just not directly on a PS5. So for that, you have to go through the Remote Play app to do it, which is not totally clean. We also tried it with other mobile controllers like the Razer Kishi, and it just only worked with the DualShock 4. But still, we think the coolest part is giving your PlayStation 4 new life when you get a PlayStation 5 by streaming that PlayStation 5 stuff to it. That's pretty cool. Now down to number 3, on the heat and noise territory, like the Xbox Series X we tested previously, things here seem pretty good. Very cool and very quiet. Here's a temperature reading on the exhaust. It's the best we can do with the tools we have, keep in mind. And here's the output of the fans. This is how loud the console is. We had the console running a game for 3 hours before we did these tests, and it all seems safe and calm. Granted, this is early in the generation. I guarantee a game will be out in a few years that pushes this thing to its limits and makes it scream. But will it be as notoriously loud as some PS4s legendarily have been? I don't know, but at least you can get a grip on how it performs now. Now down to number 2, one of the things we did was play some old games. I mean, well, not old games, but PlayStation 4 games. Well, are those old now? Well, a lot of the first-party PS4 games got some significant upgrades for the PlayStation 5. Games like Days Gone, Ghost of Tsushima, and God of War have been upgraded to run better on PlayStation 5 using Game Boost. Days Gone runs at 60 frames per second with a dynamic 4K resolution. God of War can now hit 60 frames per second using the Favor Performance option. And Ghost of Tsushima runs at 60 frames per second and really takes advantage of the SSD in the PlayStation 5 to really boost those loading speeds that were already really good. They all let you transfer your saves too, so you can start from where you left off or dive in for a new Game Plus run. If you're a PlayStation Plus member, you get access to the PlayStation Plus Collection, which is a small collection of PlayStation 4 games that you can access. Now, there are some third-party games in there like Final Fantasy, but it is mostly PlayStation exclusives, and it's good to just have them there waiting for you. You know, there are some omissions from the newer games like Death Stranding, Last of Us Part 2, and Ghost of Tsushima, but with this, you can revisit a lot of the games, again, digitally. And that was just a nice benefit that we definitely took advantage of, and you probably will too if you get your hands on one. Now down to number 1, let's talk about load time comparisons, baby. Man, they're fast. The time difference varies a lot between the games, so we tested 4 different games. First, we did Final Fantasy VII, which loads in at roughly 35 seconds on PlayStation 4 and about 20 seconds on PlayStation 5. Then we did God of War. It loads from the dashboard to the menu in 48.2 seconds on PlayStation 4, and that's 26.2 seconds on PlayStation 5. And it loads a save file in about 25 seconds on PS4 versus 18 seconds on PlayStation 5. Journey loads in about 33 seconds on PlayStation 4 and 29 seconds on PlayStation 5. The important thing to note with this one is that it's a smaller indie game, and these types of games we didn't find too many enormous improvements, but they're still there. Next, Spider-Man. We have Spider-Man Remastered versus Spider-Man PS4. This comparison is special because it's technically a next-gen game compared to the PlayStation 4 unoptimized version, and as you can see, the difference is drastic. We have about 59 seconds on the PlayStation 4 versus 15-ish seconds on the PlayStation 5 to boot the game, and about 38 seconds on PlayStation 4 versus 2 seconds on PlayStation 5 to load a save. And one more thing we tried is the boot sequence, and in less than 13 seconds you're in, ready to play whatever you want, while in PlayStation 4 it takes 20-ish seconds to get to this point. This may be something not everybody looks at, but it's important because it's the first thing you experience when turning your console on. And if you ask us, that's a good starting place for the next generation. But these are some weird, kind of unconventional, kind of rough tests we ran. We wanted to have some fun and get you guys some info if you haven't gotten your hands on a console, so here you go. We'd love to hear from you guys in the comments what you think, and if you've put your PlayStation through any weird tests like ours, please don't try some of these at home, but let's talk.